The night everything snapped inside me began like any other family gathering warm. Fairy lights strung across my aunt's backyard in suburban Boston. The smell of grilled food drifting through the air, cousins chatting over music, and relatives taking pictures as if nothing in the world could go wrong. But life has a cruel way of revealing who truly stands with you when people are watching. I'd been helping my aunt in the kitchen, carrying trays of appetizers and checking on the drinks table, trying as always to be useful and invisible at the same time. When I heard my father's voice carve through the laughter and music like a knife, "Emily, come here now." My heart lurched painfully, and 60 pairs of eyes shifted toward me as I stepped out from the patio, wiping my hands on a napkin, unsure what I had done this time. Dad stood stiffly near the center of the yard, jaw clenched like he'd been waiting for this moment, while Mom crossed her arms and stared at me with that familiar expression of disappointment. And behind them, smiling like the devil dressed in silk, was my sister, Sophie, the golden child, the adored one, the girl who could do no wrong while my smallest mistakes were treated like sins. Dad held up a small folded paper, shaking it in the air as if it were a damning verdict. "Explain this?" he demanded. The moment I saw it, my stomach dropped. My leave request slip from work, the one I had filled out because Sophie begged me to swap shifts so she could go on a weekend getaway. I had covered for her, again, and because of that, I missed a very important meeting with my manager, something I never intended and never explained to my parents because I didn't want to embarrass Sophie. But apparently, Sophie had been busy spinning her own version of the story. Dad's voice boomed in front of 50, 60, maybe more people. "Is this why you're such a failure? Because you can't take responsibility? Your sister told us everything. You skipped work to stay out all night with random men." Gasps and whispers rippled through the guests. My cheeks burned hot as I stammered, "Dad, that's not what happened." But before I could finish defending myself, his hand cracked across my face in a slap so sharp and sudden that everything froze, even the music. My head jerked sideways, and the sting spread across my cheek like fire. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't even understand how the man who raised me could strike me in front of relatives. Neighbors, coworkers, people who would carry this moment in their memories forever. Tears stung my eyes, not from the pain, but from the humiliation that wrapped itself around me like a choking fog. And just when I thought it couldn't get worse, I heard it slow. Sarcastic clapping. Sophie, my sister, actually clapped, smiling as if this were entertaining, as if my humiliation were a performance. "She never learns," she announced loudly, ensuring everyone heard her. "Maybe now she will." The betrayal in her voice cut deeper than the slap. I looked at Mom, silently begging her to step in, to say something, to at least pretend to care, but she simply looked away. Dad didn't apologize. No one defended me. Guests whispered behind their hands, pretending to be shocked while secretly enjoying the drama because people love watching another woman break. My hands trembled, my face throbbed, and something inside me cracked, not my pride, but the years of suppressed strength I had swallowed to keep peace in a family that never protected me. Without speaking another word, I turned away, ignoring the pitying looks, ignoring the whispers of "poor girl," ignoring even Sophie's triumphant smirk. I walked past the tables, past the string lights, past the open doors of the house until I reached the quiet side of the yard where no one would follow. My breath shook as I took out my phone, and with a steadiness I didn't recognize in myself. I made a single call, not to a friend, not to a relative, but to the one person who knew the truth about my work ethic, my sacrifices, and my loyalty, my boss. Because Sophie didn't know something very important, my boss wasn't just a regular supervisor. He was the regional director, someone who had worked closely with both of us. Someone who knew exactly why Sophie had been fired from the company 2 years ago. She stole client leads, tampered with documents, and left me to pick up the pieces. I had protected her then, lied for her, defended her, believing she'd grow up and appreciate it one day. But people like Sophie don't change, they simply sharpen their cruelty when it benefits them. The phone rang once before he answered, his tone warm and concerned. "Emily, are you all right?" I swallowed hard, tasting blood from where I'd bitten my lip after the slap. "I'm ready to tell you everything," I whispered, my voice barely audible. He exhaled, almost relieved. "I've been waiting for this call." And in that moment under the dim lights, with the noise of the party fading behind me, I realized something. This wasn't the night I broke. This was the night I began to rise. I didn't return to the party that night. Instead, I sat alone on the curb outside my aunt's house, listening to the muffled music and fading laughter while the cool Boston air brushed against my swollen cheek, reminding me of the humiliation my own father had delivered in front of 60 witnesses. I replayed the moment again and again, the sound of the slap, the burns spreading across my face, the stunned silence of the crowd, and worst of all, my sister Sophie clapping with a delighted smirk, as if she'd finally won some twisted game she'd been playing for years. But beneath the pain, something solid settled inside me, a certainty that the moment I made that quiet phone call, everything had shifted. I didn't cry that night. I didn't scream. I simply waited for morning like someone waiting for a storm she herself had summoned. And the storm arrived sooner than expected. At around 9 the next morning, while I was in my room gently pressing an ice pack against the side of my face, I heard my father call out from the living room, "Emily, you have visitors." His tone held confusion, maybe even annoyance, but not concern. I took a slow breath and stepped out, and there they were, my boss, impeccably dressed in his navy blazer and calm expression, and beside him 2 HR officials holding a large folder thick enough to crush whatever lies Sophie had tangled me in. My parents stiffened, exchanging confused glances, and Sophie, who was lounging on the couch wearing yesterday's makeup and her usual smugness, rolled her eyes dramatically. When my boss looked at me, his expression softened. "Emily," he said gently, "I'm so sorry for what happened to you last night." My father's eyebrows shot up. "What is this about?" he demanded. The HR manager opened the folder, placing it on the coffee table like a judge laying out evidence for a trial. My boss's voice was calm, but firm-sharper than I'd ever heard it. "Your daughter has been covering for someone who has repeatedly sabotaged her career." Sophie laughed harshly. "Oh God, Emily brought her pay parade home now?" But the HR manager ignored her and slid a stack of printed screenshots across the table. "These," she said, "are internal emails, shift logs, and access reports proving that Sophie used Emily's login to alter files, delete client responses, move appointments, and mismanage accounts under Emily's name." My mother leaned forward, eyes widening, her face growing pale as the pile of evidence grew. "Every time she stole Emily's shifts," the HR manager continued. "Every time she tampered with the schedule. Every time she erased project notes to make it appear that Emily was unprepared." My father stared at the pages as if trying to understand how he could have been so wrong about the daughter he slapped in front of an audience. But the HR manager wasn't finished. She pulled out more papers, emails Sophie thought she had long deleted. Personal messages to coworkers, messages dripping with malice and jealousy. And then the final blow, the one that sucked the air out of the room, a printed email where Sophie wrote to a colleague, "Emily is too dumb to be promoted. I just make sure her life stays where it belongs below mine." My mother covered her mouth, trembling. My father sat down heavily on the armchair, his face collapsing into disbelief. He looked at Sophie not as the golden daughter he adored, but as a stranger capable of cruelty he never imagined. My boss then looked directly at him and said quietly, "Last night, you slapped the wrong daughter." Silence flooded the room, thick and suffocating. Sophie's face drained of color. The smirk she'd worn with such confidence the night before vanished. "That's taken out of context," she stammered, but the HR representative cut her off. "There is no context that excuses identity misuse, workplace sabotage, and defamation. The company has reopened the case, and given the evidence, we will be notifying law enforcement." Mom sank onto the couch, her hands shaking uncontrollably. Dad stared at Sophie like he was confronting a truth he wished he could unhear. But while they grappled with the fallout of their favorite daughter's betrayal, my boss turned to me with something entirely different in his hands, a crisp, official document. "Emily," he said softly, "you earned this months ago. But someone tampered with your file to keep it from going through." He handed me the letter, and as I read it, my heart pounded with disbelief. It was a promotion letter, my promotion. "Congratulations," he said, smiling warmly, as if he had been waiting a long time to say those words. "You are now the assistant regional manager. Effective immediately." My mother gasped. My father looked away, ashamed. Sophie's eyes filled with tears, tears that for once weren't manipulation, but fear. I didn't smile or cry or gloat. I simply nodded and thanked them, because in that moment, I realized the real victory wasn't the promotion itself. It was stepping out of the shadow Sophie had spent years forcing me under. The HR manager then spoke directly to Sophie. "You will receive an official notice regarding the legal and employment implications of your actions. You may respond through counsel." Sophie burst into tears, reaching for my mother like a child, but my mother recoiled slightly, not from hatred, but from shock so deep she didn't know how to touch her own daughter. My father didn't say a word, not to Sophie, not to me. He just stared at his hands, finally understanding the magnitude of what he had done the night before. Meanwhile, I stood there, calm not because the pain was gone, but because the truth had finally stepped into the light. And for the first time in my life, I was standing beside it. In the days that followed the confrontation in my living room, everything in our household felt different, quieter, heavier, as if the walls themselves were still absorbing the shock of seeing Sophie's carefully curated reputation crumble overnight. Sophie tried to apologize almost immediately, hovering around my room with trembling hands and red eyes, whispering desperate lines like, "Emily, sis, please help me." I didn't mean for it to go this far, but her voice shook with fear, not remorse, and every time I heard her speak, all I could picture was the way she clapped when our father slapped me in front of 60 people, the bright satisfaction in her eyes, the triumphant tilt of her smile as she watched me fall. Apart publicly, that image had burned itself into my memory, and no apology could erase it. "No," I told her softly, the same way she once told lies about me, quietly, cleanly, without hesitation. "You meant every moment," and she had. She meant the humiliation, the sabotage, the lies, and the cruelty. For years, she meant every bit of it. And now, consequences meant her. Within the week, it was as if karma had stepped into her life with a clipboard and started checking boxes. Her side job dropped her the second they heard about the investigation. Her friends stopped responding to her texts after realizing she wasn't the victim she always painted herself to be. And even our relatives, who once adored her and bragged about her like she was a prize-winning daughter, began keeping their distance, exchanging whispered conversations about how shocking it all is and how terrible her behavior sounds. Sophie, who had built her identity on attention and admiration, suddenly found herself alone in a world that no longer applauded her. Meanwhile, my life shifted in a direction I had almost given up hoping for. My first day stepping into my new role as assistant regional manager felt surreal, a quiet, steady validation of everything I'd endured. My boss greeted me warmly, my coworkers congratulated me with genuine smiles, and for the first time in my professional life, people saw me without Sophie's shadow casting itself over my achievements. My boss even adjusted my schedule to give me more flexibility, something I had always silently wished for but never asked for because I was too busy covering for my sister's disasters. My new paycheck was triple what I used to make, enough for me to sign a lease on a small but beautiful apartment downtown. It wasn't extravagant, but it was peaceful, the kind of peace people talk about in books and quiet girl daydreams. I furnished it slowly, carefully, with things I liked, not things chosen to please or avoid upsetting someone else. Sitting in that apartment, eating takeout on my own couch, Felt like reclaiming parts of myself I didn't know I had lost. My parents took longer to adjust to the new reality. My mother seemed shaken most days, moving through the house like someone trying to unlearn a belief she had held for years. My father avoided me not out of anger, but guilt. The day he apologized, it was awkward and unsteady. He approached me in the hall, cleared his throat, stared at the floor, and murmured, "I shouldn't have. I'm sorry, Emily." He didn't look me in the eyes, and somehow that made the apology feel even more honest. I accepted it not because I wanted his forgiveness, but because I wanted my own freedom. Carrying resentment would mean letting him slap me over and over in my memory, and I refused to let that happen. Accepting his apology wasn't for him, it was for me. The real revenge, I learned, wasn't destroying Sophie or proving my parents wrong. It was rebuilding myself where they tried to break me. It was rising without needing their validation. It was walking into my own future without dragging their opinions behind me. A few months passed and life settled into a new, quieter rhythm. The sting of humiliation dulled into a memory I no longer felt ashamed of. I come out the other side stronger, sharper, and surprisingly calm. When my aunt invited me to another family gathering, smaller this time, softer, more intimate, I hesitated at first, but eventually decided to go. Not for them, but for myself. I didn't want that backyard to remain the scene of my humiliation forever. I wanted to rewrite my memory of it. When I arrived, it felt different. There were only about 15 people there. No loud music, no gossiping cliques, no forced laughter. Just warm lights, soft conversations, and relatives who approached me with genuine warmth. Sophie wasn't there. She had declined the invitation, which didn't surprise me. She had disappeared into the background of family life, a shadow of the person she once pretended to be. As I stood under those familiar string lights that had once illuminated my worst moment, I felt a quiet sense of closure. My mother walked up to me slowly, as if unsure whether she had the right to face me. Her voice was small when she whispered, "Emily, I'm proud of you." I didn't need her approval anymore, not after everything that had happened, but hearing it felt like a soft, unexpected gift. It didn't heal the past, but it acknowledged the present. And that was enough. Because sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't fire or fury. It's truth revealed quietly, dignity rebuilt silently, strength forged slowly after a lifetime of being underestimated. I stayed at the gathering for only an hour talking to my cousins, drinking lemonade, watching the soft lights flicker across the yard. When I finally left, I walked out of that backyard not as the girl who was slapped, or humiliated or clapped, but as the woman who survived it, rose from it, and reclaimed her voice. No slaps, no applause, just respect. Respect I earned myself with one quiet call that changed everything.